All right. So I have with me here Mr. Ed Beeson, soon to be Dr. Ed Beeson. Ed, if you'd like to give us just a brief introduction
Sure.
and why history is so important to you.
Sure. So I've taught, excuse me, I've taught history here on Tech Campus since 2008. Just recently, I've been working on my PhD for quite some time. Hopefully after next Friday, I will have it. So I've got to go do that defense next Friday. My interpretation of history is, it's one of those things that, it kind of tells you where you are and kind of gives you a bearing about where you can go, like some of the folks said on the screen there. So full disclosure, I'm not a Franklin expert, but I've taught several courses on American history and the Revolutionary period. Generally knowledgeable about Franklin.
So I think a couple things. First is we have a few questions that we can certainly discuss, but we want to make this interactive as well. So we want to hear from you all. So let's get this started out with what you just saw.
Mm-hmm.
What's your interpretation of Benjamin Franklin? What is Ken Burns really trying to say here?
Well, I think he's pointing out several different things. Obviously, Franklin represents a lot of different things to a lot of different people. The printer aspect of it. I mean, he was a printer before he was really anything. They didn't talk about it on this screening. I don't remember seeing it there, but on his epitaph, of all the things he did, he is obviously a statesman. He's at the Constitution Convention. He's doing all of these things. When he dies, his epitaph reads Benjamin Franklin, printer, because he was a printer for about 50 years or so, on and off anyway. He owned print shops in Philadelphia, Barbados, other areas, and that's kind of where he drew his main source of income, all while doing these other things. He's also an inventor, obviously, the electricity thing. That kind of touches on some of the things that I'm doing in my dissertation. Anyway, one of the things that I focus on is telegraphy. And obviously telegraphy, you have to use electricity to send those messages. There's a lot of discussion in the mid-19th century, long after Franklin is long gone, about how electricity even works. What does it do? And it's remarkable that his discoveries in the 1750s, actually the 1740s, is kind of paving the way for things like telegraphy and a little bit later on the telephone, and even some of the work that Nikola Tesla is doing in the 1880s, what Thomas Edison is doing in the 1870s. So it's just kind of he's a really, really fascinating character in some of the personal things that he's doing, and then also the way he kind of translates that over into politics and his vision for, his political vision for the country.
Mm-hmm. Which is still obviously very evident today. I mean, 1740 seems like so long ago, but in history, I mean, that's just a blip of the eye. So I would love to hear from you all, anybody that's in the audience, and also anybody that's online with us today too. Feel free to ask any questions or any of your comments in the comment section. But I'd like to open it up to you all as well. What is Ken Burns telling us here? What do we think? What is this legacy that Benjamin Franklin has brought us? I mean, there's so many things, but what personally for you all really hit home?
I'm just curious, in the self-improvement virtues that he had listed, I think he had listed 12 and then he added one.
Right, humility.
What other ones were omitted from his list? I don't know if you...
I'm not sure. I mean, when you look at Franklin's personal life, there's all kinds of stories. The one that jumped out at me was chastity. And the reason I say that is because Franklin was a diplomat. He was, before Jefferson was the diplomat to Paris, Franklin was our kind of go-to person during the American Revolution. He helps hammer out things like the Treaty of Alliance of 1778. He's instrumental in bringing the French into the American Revolution. Well, there's all kinds of stories about Franklin in Paris visiting brothels. He has an illegitimate child, and there's all kinds of things. And I guess that just kind of lays out for you. He has this vision for himself, even though he doesn't always follow it. Now, I'm sure there's lots of different things that you can add to that. I do find it kind of humorous that he omits that humility. I guess he didn't really find that to be too virtuous until it was like explicitly pointed out.
But what I found interesting too is that like you said, he was always constantly trying to improve himself, improve everything around him. So where we saw on the preview, he graphed it out and showed every time that that he failed at that. So I think that he was recognizing that not everything is perfect, and if we continue to try to strive for that, then that's good enough, if not better. And then also, what I found very interesting is with, when they flung the doors open and asked, do we have a monarchy or a republic? He said, if we have a republic, if we can keep it. They said many times that the Constitution itself wasn't necessarily perfect, and there was a big elephant in the room as well, but we know that we have something, and it persists to this day. So again, what are your all's interpretations? What do you all think? I'd love to hear from you all.
I like this networking opportunity
Yes.
to put together. I mean, when we talk about that today in the PBS world, that it's important for people to gather and share ideas and be innovative. And I mean, he was doing it, so many years ago. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
And he did it for his own, well-being, to kind of gather the knowledge and the experience. But he was so wise. He was 21.
Yeah.
Yeah. To me, that's amazing. He would have that kind of vision or forethought to be able to implement things like that.
Those were not things on my mind at 21. I can tell you that much for sure.
It wasn't a lot of that. I'm looking forward to the show on Monday.
Oh, it's going to be amazing. Yeah, April
This is just
4th and
snippets.
5th.
There's little snippets from the actual.
Yeah.
Is it 4 parts?
2 parts.
Just
2 parts on the 4th and 5th. Be sure to check the programming guide for the times. But any feedback from either of you all?
Colleges and schools so far in the past for me, studying Franklin, but I guess he did so much over the course of his life that really one person, it seems like you're looking at 5 or 6 personalities combined into one person because they're going all these different angles. It's still hard to comprehend that somebody had that much smarts in so many different directions. And even if they couldn't convince somebody to do something, they could find that common ground.
Right.
And sometimes they make it feel like it's their, the person's idea that they go forward with. It just seems like you have a way of convincing people.
Absolutely. And I think, I keyed in on the compromise as well. They said that, you may not be a great leader if you compromise, but we can have a great country if we compromise. And I thought that was a very interesting aspect. So let me,
I'd be curious to know more about his upbringing, because
yes.
the screener didn't focus too much on that, and I'm sure we'll get into that, in the actual series. But I'm wondering how much of his upbringing, Ed, if you know much about his upbringing, contributed to his course in life.
That I'm not 100% sure. I do know he was brought up as, kind of in that Puritan vein. I think one of the things that sometimes people overlook about Franklin is he was born in 1706. He was much older than any other Franklin. Even George Washington. George Washington was born in 1732, and he was kind of considered one of the older guys of the Revolutionary generation. So you have Ben Franklin, who is 26 years older than even George Washington himself. And I say that to say this: he's coming up. He's raised in Boston. That's that burned over district. You've got people like, the legacy of people like Jonathan Edwards and that whole Puritan Cotton Mather and, the whole Puritan movement. He is right in that episode. So I can imagine that whenever when he breaks, they talked a little bit about his break from the church, or at least his local church there. I can imagine that was a very, very big deal for his parents. Obviously he's saying, I'm running off to Philadelphia, but you can imagine that was a very big deal for the mom and dad there. So very interesting on how that kind of outlook. And they talked a little bit about, he didn't totally break from his church. It was more that he adopted a different formula, kind of, rather than believing in a God that was more involved in punishments and that kind of thing. It was more of a creator type thing. And I think that's indicative when you look at the whole founding generation. That's you look at the Declaration of Independence. It's the creator. There's all kinds of references to the creator in there. Jefferson, a lot of the founding fathers kind of ascribe to more of that view. So I think absolutely that. The film even referenced that. Jefferson saying we hold these truths to be sacred, and Franklin was like, no, we hold them to be self-evident. And I think that's interesting in that Franklin probably understood, when you say the word sacred, that can mean lots of different things to lots of different people. There's tracts, religious tracts written on what is sacred, what is not sacred. And I think, looking at that particular point, he strikes that out. And I think that kind of tells you a little bit about the way he views that. He very admirably sticks in self-evident. He said, no, we're just basically looking at the facts here. He's kind of going back to what Michael mentioned there earlier. He's graphing out every time he makes a misstep, and he's looking at what we would say today, he's looking at the data, right? He's basically saying, when he suggests that edit, he's saying, no, we're just looking at the data here, and everything we're looking at here, all of these things in this document are self-evident. So I think that can kind of give you an insight, just that one minor edit into kind of his thinking behind that.
So, building off of that, I've got a two-part question for you, and I'd love to hear what you all think as well. So, two-part question again is, number one, what do you think, you've mentioned electricity, telegraphy, all printing, all kinds of things. Clearly, he was an inventor and did so many things. If you had to choose one thing, what was his most important contribution? Then also, second part of the question, what is his most important legacy? So, contribution and legacy.
Well, I think as far as contribution, one of the things that he does, they didn't talk a lot about this, but one of the things that he does, it's actually a little after the Constitution Convention, is he lends his incredible political weight to the abolitionist movement. There's an abolition society in Philadelphia, and he doesn't bring that to the Constitution Convention necessarily, and I think one of the reasons for that is just what they mentioned on the film. He understood that if you bring that and you say, we are absolutely going for this, there's probably no Constitution. But in his, kind of as an aside, and certainly after the ratification of the Constitution, he gets heavily involved in abolitionist societies, and he lends his credence to that. And, he dies a few short years after the Constitution Convention, and then the abolitionist movement picks up, precipitously in the 10s, 20s, and 30s. So I think that's one of the big contributions that he makes. Legacy-wise, I think you have to kind of go back to his printer days. He, according to him, I mentioned his epitaph, and he says Benjamin Franklin printer, and I think One of the reasons for that is because he's so in tune with everything that's going on through printing. I mean, when you think about in terms of the British, for example, going into the American Revolution, one of the most famous taxes the British passed are the Stamp Act. Well, stamp tax, it basically, if you have any document whatsoever, any legal document, you have to affix a stamp up here in the top of it. You have to affix this stamp that says, I paid my taxes on this. Well, Franklin is a printer. He only deals in legal documents. I mean, anything could be a legal document. I mean, anything from newspapers to wills, deeds, even right down to playing cards. Well, you know, he's one of the first to start screaming about British taxes, and he has the means through which to put that out on a daily basis. And obviously, as they pointed out on the film, he's extremely witty. He does it in a way that convinces people that they are, that, you know, the British government is being a tyrant. Even though I always point this out to my students in class, you know, even, you know, as the British are taxing the colonials, people in England are paying like 25 times the tax rate that the people in the colonies are paying. But you have eloquent people like Franklin, and, you know, there's others. George Washington, he was a land surveyor. He dealt in deeds and wills and all kinds of stuff. Jefferson, you know, was a lawyer. Madison's a lawyer. They're all of these people are lawyers, and they're dealing in these kinds of things. And I always point this out too. I think that the Stamp Act, politically speaking, was probably one of the most foolish taxes the British could have possibly passed. But you have Franklin. You're asking about his legacy. I think that is probably kind of goes right in with that, in that he is very vocal about opposing those taxes, and he's obviously, you mentioned the networking. He doesn't stop networking even, you know, in those, you know, he's bringing people into the network, that junto they call it. But that junto is connected with other juntos, and he's a publisher connected with other publishers. And they mentioned the Albany Plan, just very briefly on there. He's extremely interested in networking on a pretty large scale. And he does that through his printing. And he's able to convince a lot of people to join the cause, either for the American Revolution or the Constitution, because, you know, when the Constitution, but sometimes there's a misconception of how it's ratified. It's not just that they say, okay, we have a new Constitution, and there you go. There it is for you. No, they have to send it around and convince people to vote for it. But one of the ways you do that is through the press. And, you know, Franklin's very well connected to the press. And, you know, it's not just his publication, but, you know, he has a great influence for that. He's lent his credence to that. So I would say publishing, you know, as a printer, that's probably one of his greatest legacies.
Okay. Very good insights. What about you all? What do you all think? Greatest contribution and or greatest legacy?
The library is pretty amazing.
Yes.
I mean,
And the college.
Yeah, the college, that's, yeah, biased, but that got my attention, especially from a public aspect.
yeah, reading is inspiring. I mean, it doesn't look like we had all that much education.
You know what I found interesting too is they said he set aside 1 to 2 hours per night for studies. How does he get all of that study, you know?
And have access to enough stuff at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would think if you went out, not in a university setting like this, but if you're just walking down the street in some small town, and you ask somebody what's the greatest legacy, frankly, first thing that comes to mind, I think both of them would be the electricity.
Yeah.
Given this paper, and it's like, if they don't remember anything else from our history, it seems like everybody does remember that.
It's very visual.
So,
I agree.
Yeah.
when
Agree.
you were first asking the professor, what he thought, I was thinking the printer too was, and I don't remember specifically, I know that when I learned about before Richard Solomon, that there's not put in there for the people when they were dealing with British.
Mhm.
It's like our first buy order.
I mean, that's a tough question when you ask what is like the single.
Right,
You know,
yeah.
it's tough.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, as a scientist, as an inventor, I mean, he's extremely influential there too. I think it's interesting too, it's through that he really, as I said, he lent his credence to the abolitionist movement and to the Constitutional Convention. That's the reason he has credence to start with. It's because he becomes well known, not as a printer to start with. He's printing, but he's just like, you know, he's a printer among printers. It's when he does those experiments in electricity. You know, there's an academy in Paris that they start trying to fact check him, basically, and they wind up saying, wow, this guy knows what he's doing. And it's really the publication or the confirmation from I forget what it was, it's something like the Paris Academy of Sciences or something like that confirmed that his discoveries were actually like they confirmed what he was saying. And that's what made him extremely popular in Europe. And before George Washington or anybody else of the founding generation was famous, Franklin became probably the most famous American in the world.
Did you all have any input? It's hard to tack down many, isn't it?
She just began reading a book about Benjamin Franklin.
Yeah.
I've been hearing little bits of it, so this caught us by surprise. And
Yeah.
we participate.
Absolutely. And we're so glad you came out as well. What I'll ask you, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot. So you're reading a book about Ben Franklin. Is there anything in particular there that has really jumped out to you?
I haven't gotten that far.
Mhm.
You know, it's mostly a lot of things in his personal life.
Right,
And they talk about his illegitimate son.
right,
His common law wife, he never married her. They just became common law spouses. And I found that to be unusual for the day.
yes, indeed.
And, but you know, she was like him, they were just very frugal. And I wondered, do you know if he has any direct descendants?
I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure on that.
Did they talk about the mistreatment of his wife in the book that he went so far? Because he was sort of known for the mistreatment of his wife and women.
And you know, and yet she seems so loyal, you know, because he had dumped her. He goes to London, dumps her, she marries somebody else, he runs off, and then he comes back, and then he wants a dowry to get married. But I heard that I don't know, I've never seen a picture of him when he was young, but they talk about how good looking he was in his younger days.
Yeah, I see pictures of him when he was.
I'd like to see when he was young.
Well, and I'm glad that you brought that up. You know, the treatment of his wife, obviously owned slaves as well, for such a great accomplishments. But also, and even as you have mentioned before, you know, there's certainly imperfection, to put it lightly. But you know, with the treatment of women and slaves, how do we balance this? How do we balance such a great legacy in history, but with his personal life as well? What's your take on that?
My take is you acknowledge it. I mean, you bring it right out, you face it head on. You know, for many, many years, you know, if you take, for example, the slavery issue for many years, it was kind of swept under the rug, or at
Right.
least kind of dodged, and there was not a lot of, like, you didn't speak directly about. One of the things that I focus on as well is public history, and particularly like if you're looking at, I don't know, plantation homes, or, you know, the homes of museum type homes of famous Americans. You know, if you're looking, for example, Colonial Williamsburg or other type homes or museums that were around during the era of slavery for many, many years. You go visit a place like that, and a tour might offhandedly mention slavery, but there was never really a, you know, like let's deal with this head on. I think the best way to do that, most of those places now are doing that. And so the best way to do that is kind of the way Ken Burns is approaching it here is you say, yes, there's contributions, but there's also, there's that human side. There are those flaws in either, if you're talking about women's rights at the Constitution or the 3/5 compromise, you point out those things as they are, as flaws.
Right. Because we as humans can carry two trains of thought.
Yeah.
It's not an either or type
Yeah.
of thing. Okay, that's interesting. So we have just a few minutes left right now. I thought I might open the floor if any of you all have any questions for Mr. Soon-to-be Dr. Beeson and any of us as well. So I'll give you all that this couple of moments.
Well, this airs on the 4th and 5th at
Yes,
7 p.m.
it does.
And then Encore's the same night at 9 p.m.
Very good.
I really enjoyed your interpretation.
Oh, well, thank you.
Benjamin
Thank you.
Franklin.
Yeah.
I have no, I feel like you're going to pass your dissertation with flying colors. I really, you're going to make a great professor. You make a great professor.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Very good. Well, again, thank you so much for everybody coming out. If you have any questions or anything, please let us know. But again, that's on the 4th and 5th at 7 p.m. We will be airing WCT will air the entire series on those 2 nights, 2 parts. And of course, then also on Saturday, April the 9th at 2 p.m., please join in on the live stream for the EagleWorks competition. And then soon after that, we will be making a special 30-minute episode on the top 3 winners. So again, you can join via the stream, but you can also come and watch in person. So with that said, if you have any questions, please let us know. But otherwise, we really appreciate you all coming out today. Thank you, and very, very welcome to integrate with us here at Tennessee Tech.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Y'all have a wonderful evening.